Coming up on this week's show, I experienced the daily grind with OlliOlli2.
John wheels out his top 5 skating classics.
They banned dancing in Footloose, and if it's good enough for Kevin Bacon, yeah, it's good enough for me.
We talk decks, trucks and rock and roll with OlliOlli creators Roll 7. And this assortment of thrill seekers talk up extreme sports.
Maybe a bit like Motorstorm, but you know, you're pedaling.
All this radness awaits on this week's Video Game Nation. Skateboarding is cool. I am not cool. From the moment my young, unsteady feet made and immediately lost contact with my first and only skateboard, I knew that I lacked the skill, discipline, and devil-may-care attitude required to become the next Tony Hawk, Rodney Mullen, or Bart Simpson.
So I retreated to the safety of my bedroom and lived out the life of a pro skater without suffering all those bruises, broken bones, and lucrative sponsorship deals. From 720 degrees to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, skating games occupied a special half-pipe-shaped place in my heart for many years and taught me a newfound appreciation of obscure US punk bands.
But then, everything went a bit wrong.
Initially, it was just a question of unnecessary bloat. After undisputed champion Tony Hawk's Pro Skater peaked somewhere around the 3rd installment, subsequent updates just kept packing on pointless new additions while stripping away the charm.
Sensing the need to innovate, some bright spark at Activision decided that what was required was a controller shaped like a wheelless skateboard, or board, and the series-killing Tony Hawk ride was born.
With the once king of the hill now an embarrassing mountain of unsold peripherals, EA Skate stepped in as the purist's game of choice. Accomplished as it was perhaps a little too close to the exacting nature of the sport to crack the mainstream, and so the series was canned after just 3 games.
Much like a Tony Hawk ride controller, the wheels had fallen off the skating genre.
It took a whopping 4 years for a new champion to emerge in the form of indie game OlliOlli. In essence, it was Tony Hawk 2D, full of the impossible combos, preposterous grinds, and increasingly devilish objectives that made those early games so irresistible. But it was also as effortlessly cool as the sport that inspired it, from its stylish vector art to its laid-back soundtrack.
However, for a generation of gamers who'd committed the Tony Hawk control scheme to muscle memory, it took a little bit of time to adapt to its idiosyncrasies.
I think control system's really good, actually, and I'm glad that skateboarding games have sort of gone back to buttons as a mechanic, because the last skateboarding game I reviewed was Tony Hawk's Ride. I remember at one point I got so frustrated trying to ride this plastic skateboard in my living room and not being able to do any tricks that I just sat down on the floor and I picked the thing up and I just started doing that and just waggling it above my head, and I like doubled my high score.
You have to press X to land in OlliOlli. Once you've done that, you're fine. You're totally golden. The rest of it's quite intuitive. There's a lot of grinding, a lot of trick combos. Have you ever done any 2D platformer? It's bizarrely like an older 2D platformer, more that than something like Tony Hawk.
Once you get into the groove of it, it's really compelling. It's just like, you need to get this idea in your head that you're not just jumping, you're also landing.
It's one of the first games that's made me feel really old, because I can't do the most basic things in it. And even though I've read stuff online, I cannot work out how to do it.
A year on, and PS4 and Vita owners have already been treated to a sequel that aims to do everything its precursor did, only bigger and better. Because, you know, sequels.
It's quite fitting then that OlliOlli2 is set in a movie-themed skating mecca called Hollywood. Imagine if all the sets of blockbuster flicks had been conveniently set up for sick lines and endless combo opportunities, and you've got a pretty solid idea of what to expect.
As well as this welcome injection of visual variety, OlliOlli2 also takes its cues from the superior Tony Hawk games by introducing manuals, reverts, and grind switching. If you're not familiar with skating terminology, they're basically linking tricks that allow for massive, level-long combos that make you feel like a god.
A big part of OlliOlli2's appeal is that it captures the try again ethos of skateboarding perfectly. It's possible to bail at every opportunity, although in this comically hazard-filled world, a skinned knee is the least of your concerns. Restarts are gratifyingly instantaneous, which is just as well because you're going to witness more spectacular falls than a skydiving instructor.
So yes, it's a demanding game, one full of pixel-perfect jumps, split-second grinds and grueling checkpoint-free stages. In fact, it's not so much a skating simulation as it is a platformer on 4 wheels.
I think OlliOlli is a really good platformer. I think that it's a very different platformer to what you normally would see, because it's more of a pure platformer. It's like an obstacle course, and it's all about just being able to do the most with the same course over and over again.
I think it's a great platformer. I think that whole thing of pressing X just before you land is just genius, really. It's such a simple thing, but it makes for such a sort of addictive mechanic.
It's like a 9 out of 10 platformer, if you ask me, OlliOlli. It's a sport game I actually enjoy, which really hasn't been a thing since, probably Tony Hawk.
Until you said that, it had never even occurred to me that OlliOlli was a platformer. So, I don't know, does that make it a really good platformer or a really bad one?
Considering it costs well under a tenner to own both PS4 and Vita versions thanks to the wonder that it's cross-buy, OlliOlli2 is an absolute steal. Much like the real sport, there's endless room for self-improvement. An extra spin here, a more elaborate trick there, that'll keep you replaying its 50+ levels long after you've conquered the objectives. There is a sense that it's one flat ground trick away from repeating the mistakes of its overcomplicated ancestors, but what really matters is that OlliOlli2 makes a clumsy oaf like me feel like a skating legend. Talking of legends, here's John Robertson with his top 5 games featuring people who aren't content to get around on foot. Lazy.
Hello, television friends. Hi, Def. High five. Skateboarding. All the fun of balancing on a bit of wood, none of the joy of not actually doing that. With all due respect to the noble art of standing and rolling, there aren't actually that many video games that are just skateboarding. So today's list encompasses all manner of roller vehicle, lest this be a top 5 that consists entirely of games that start with the words Tony and Hawk. Number 5 is brought to you by the people who brought you Road Rash, which isn't a gravel-related disease.
It's a game about bikers beating each other with weapons. Skitchin' is that, but on rollerblades. Yes, sir. The 90s loved 4 things: baggy clothes, backwards caps, inline skates, and because we didn't have cat videos on the internet to make us docile, extreme violence.
To get around the speed deficiency that comes from taking a motorcycle and replacing it with shoes on wheels, Skitchin adds a gameplay element that's so mind-bogglingly unsafe, it's a miracle anyone survived the decade.
You can't go as fast as a car, so you grab the back of a car, then thump everyone else in the neck with a lead pipe.
It's as brainless as you'll be if you attempt it in real life. I love it. This game should be impossible.
It's a sandbox skateboarding game when everyone knows that sand is the skateboard's natural enemy. It's got a plot involving jail, cops, and a city that's been rebuilt after an earthquake. It's a city where skateboarding appears to be the ultimate crime.
But hell, they banned dancing in Footloose, and if it's good enough for Kevin Bacon, it's good enough for me.
The dynamics of your tricks are many and varied, and you can get off your board to change the landscape, making ramps bigger and better by moving stuff around. Walking is clunky, but hell, that's why you skate.
The story is fun, and the game's open world nature means this is your chance to skate free around a city without doing anything pesky, like worrying that you look dorky in a helmet. Back to the 90s, and no more racing or stunts. It's time to discover that there's no I in team, or eyes in your head, once my team is finished with you.
Published by Activision and the delightfully named Whiz-Bang Software, Hyperblade is ice hockey, but played in the future. So, no ice, just armoured thugs in an egg-shaped metal dome with rules that allow you to decapitate, pummel and electrocute your enemies.
To the modern viewer, this must just look like stacks of triangles trying to mate with each other. But in 1996, this was fast, dynamic, and didn't run on any operating system more powerful than Windows 95.
There have been better skating games and better sports games and better future sports games, but Hyperblade was a noble attempt to bring the future home 20 years ago.
And the name Hyperblade is pure 1990s cool sci-fi. We've got rollerblades. What's going to be better than that? Hyperblades. Yeah. whoomp, there he is, the king of skateboarding franchises, does a 900-degree spin, plonks his board down, and makes it onto this list. But why?
The consensus is this is as good as the innovation got in the Tony Hawk series. Adding the revert maneuver to your plethora of skateboard tricks means the potential for trick combos opened up incredibly, and I'm a fan of any game that puts you in peril a helmet and elbow pads couldn't possibly fix.
It's the game that taught you what a lonely Doberman already knows about your leg. Grinding can be fun.
Jet Set Radio is one of the Sega Dreamcast's most beloved titles, a cel-shaded romp that looks like a Gorillaz video clip where you and your gang are taking over a future Tokyo with spray paint, speed and tricks. It's such a classic that it brought the rail grinding mechanic into games. Let's be fair, it's a complete triumph of aesthetics and gameplay.
This is essentially a hipster anime in responsive game form, and that's a good thing.
The soundtrack is superb and the game continues to stand up after all these years. What's not to love about a future Tokyo stuffed with pirate radio stations, villains dressed as fish, and rival gangs as colourful as they are ludicrous? I borrowed a mate's Dreamcast 11 years ago, and this, and the fact that I moved and his ex-girlfriend stole my Sega Genesis, is one of the reasons I still have it.
Also, it's more proof that skating games aren't quite what I'd feared they'd be. Niche sports things for people who use words like ollie in conversation and live their lives like parkour with added wood. How does it accomplish this mild miracle? By being so niche, it actually becomes magically universal. Radical.
Don't be alarmed if the next 3 minutes contain little to no video game related material. It's a known bug that our engineers are working around the clock to patch. We're assured that version 1.1 of the show will feature reputable talent discussing extreme sports and an interview with OlliOlli2 creators Roll7. See you soon, I hope.
And all the bikes made this awful noise like someone had got a load of wasps in a biscuit tin and was just shaking it.
Just beautiful.
Well, hello there. Now, when it comes to gaming's relationship with extreme sports, skateboarding is just the tip of the iceberg, an iceberg that somehow is also on fire and teetering on the edge of the Grand Canyon. Watch now, attractive viewer, as our panel of experts talk about living vicariously through thrill-seeking digital avatars by way of escaping their own dreary existences to the max.
I think extreme sports and games work very well together because they both push the limits of what's possible. People who play video games love to play with the boundaries, as I think do most people who do extreme sports. The safety of video games, of course, is that you're not at risk of actual injury.
I mean, have you ever actually tried to ollie a skateboard? I mean, you could spend years just trying to perfect this one rubbish move, which is, let's be honest, it's rubbish. It's the basic skateboard move. Whereas, you know, you play a video game, all of a sudden you're sliding on a rail over like some amazing thing between buildings. Yeah, I will never do that.
I think extreme sports are one of those classical, like, aspirational fantasies, you know? Like, everyone wants to be a skateboarder. Everyone wants to be, you know, a BMX rider, but you can't be because it takes loads of time and dedication and it really hurts most people. So, you know, adapting that into a game is just perfect, just like a, you know, a military shooter or something like that. It's an escapist fantasy of being, you know, this extreme sports person.
A lot of extreme sports are about tricks and little flourishes which tie quite naturally to the control scheme. So although I can't do it in OlliOlli, the different movements that you do on the stick, in a similar way to fighting games, you've got that sort of thing. But also, I guess, anything that makes people like me who spend like sunny days sat in their house playing computer games, anything that makes you feel less like a nerd and more like you might be cool is probably a good thing. So that's probably the main reason why they're popular.
My favourite extreme sports game of all time, it's a bit of an obscure one. It's called MTX Moto Tracks from 2004. And it's a motocross game, and it's got a real motocross guy in it called Travis Pastrana. Now, I've got no interest in motocross at all. I absolutely couldn't give a monkey's. But I liked this one because it looked sort of hilariously bad. Like the wheels on the bikes were sort of hexagonal because it was 2004, right? And all the bikes made this awful noise like someone had got a load of wasps in a biscuit tin and was just shaking it, just sort of like.
A favourite extreme sports game of mine is Skate, the whole Skate series, because it's so charmingly broken. And there's nothing funnier than ragdoll physics in a video game, and ragdoll physics plus skateboards is a winning combination.
I really like 1080 snowboarding on the N64, but I've also really enjoyed Trials recently, the whole Trial series. Again, not very good at it, so I can only do the basics. It's the same thing again, like you can lean forwards and backwards on the bike, but there's like bits where you've got to go up almost vertical things. I don't know how you don't make it fall over backwards, or sometimes it's like a wall like that and you've got to like go up it and then somehow you just hop like that, which I don't even understand the physics of how they do it, even though I've seen them do it for real. So again, I'm pretty basic, but I enjoy trying to be good at the Trial series.
So I have long loved the Tony Hawk series. I really can't decide which my favorite is between basically Pro Skater 2 and Pro Skater 4, with Pro Skater 3 in between. Like all three of those, they're just iterations of the same brilliant thing. I absolutely adore the Tony Hawk's games. I mean, they got me, and the thing is back then, those games got me into so much music and fashion, as well as just being good games. They really felt like they were absolutely massive in the culture at the time, a huge part of my adolescence.
Well, I think it's certainly about time that we had extreme ironing, which I imagine would be a bit like kind of like a shadow of the Colossus climb, like this like epic climb, and then you get to the top of somewhere really kind of, you know, wobbly and high up, and then it would be like a really rubbish QTE event of like having to iron, press for steam, go, turn it over, and then you'd have like a really nice pressed ironing shirt, you know, on top of a mountain or something.
So I'm a mum now, so I have to engage daily in the extreme sport of trying to get a buggy on a crowded tube train, which is extremely dangerous and extreme and violent, and you do have to sort of potentially maim people in the knees to get your child on the train. So I think that could be fun, yeah.
I think mountain biking would be awesome, because you've got this, you know, there's been cycling games like Tour de France, and those are rubbish, but like the idea of like almost like Trials, but it's 3D, and it's like a big, like awesome race, maybe a bit like MotorStorm, but you know, you're pedaling.
I don't know if this counts as an extreme sport, but spacewalking. Definitely spacewalking. I'd really like to play a game in which you spacewalk properly and technically with extreme precision, and then are constantly at risk of spinning off into the depths, boundless depths of space. I would enjoy that. I think there'd be tension there.
When I knew you were going to ask me about this, I actually went on Wikipedia and had a look at all the different extreme sports, and I think I'm going to have to pick extreme ironing, which, as far as I can gather, is just people in shades starching shirts on mountains. So for anybody who is watching this, if you've ever, like, someone should say this, and I'm quite happy to, if you've ever done or ever thought about doing extreme ironing, everyone you know hates you, including your parents.
New Cross in south-east London is probably best known for being home to Goldsmiths College, which counts the likes of artist Damien Hirst, 50 Shades of Grey director Sam Taylor-Johnson, and all 4 members of Blur as alumni. But that's not why I'm here, mainly because they've all moved away. No, I'm here because it's also home to indie studio Roll7, creators of both OlliOlli games and upcoming 2.25D cover shooter, Not a Hero. Founded in 2008 by John Ribbins, Simon Bennett and Tom Hegarty, Roll7 has earned a reputation for delivering slick, arcade-style thrills that offer style and substance in equal measure. But it wasn't always that way, as my interview with the team reveals.
So Roll7 actually came at the back of another company myself and Simon were running called Rolling Sound, and that worked with disadvantaged young people, youth offenders, young people in care, and we used various multimedia to train them up and try and get them into education. From there we worked with a couple of young people who are really interested in video games, and they actually wanted to make their own anti-knife crime computer game. So we got the 2 guys together, then we built a team of other young people that were interested in the coding, the animation, the music, the voiceovers, the script, everything to do with building a game. And we made one game called Soul Control, which was an anti-knife crime game, and off the back of that, Channel 4 then commissioned a game called Dead Ends, in which we took some of the original team from Soul Control and then built a bigger team around it, and that became a game that was released as part of the Disarming Britain series back in 2008, and that was the start of Roll7. The NeuroSky headset is a piece of tech made out in America, in San Jose, and it was something that we came across through various business connections we'd been making over the years.
We partner with the University of Wollongong in Australia and a company called Neurocog in Canada to make a computer game called Focus Pocus. And Focus Pocus was for kids with ADHD, and it was sort of a research-based and proven cognitive behavioural therapy treatment for young people. So they play as a wizard, they're training their wizard at wizard school, but in doing so they're also training their mind to be calm in certain situations. They're also doing proven cognitive behavioural therapy exercises whilst trying to become a wizard.
Alongside the NeuroSky games, we were doing a lot of agency work as well. We did some production videos, we were doing games for health, games for education, but we'd always wanted to create our own IP. And so in between some of the projects we had a bit of time. We basically stole time from some of our coders, some of our artists, and we created a game called Gets to the Exit, which no one has ever heard of.
We were down at Develop with Gets to the Exit, and we met with James Marsden, who's from Future Lab. They made Velocity, and James was shown OlliOlli, our prototype, and he said, well, I'll just introduce you to PlayStation. We're working with them. Shahid's awesome. And he sent an email to Shahid that just said, Shahid, Tom, Shahid, fight. The legend goes that John showed every game that we had apart from OlliOlli, and they just weren't interested at all. We showed them old stuff we're doing, we showed them a few prototypes, they weren't excited at all. And then Tom was like, dude, show him OlliOlli, and John's like, no, it's not ready yet. And Tom kicked him under the table and was like, dude. And he gave Shahid the iPad, and Shahid spent about 30 minutes playing the game. And then he turned around to John and Tom and was like, right, let's bring this to Vita.
Although Not a Hero as a 2.25D cover shooter is very different to OlliOlli, there's kind of some core principles that remain the same.
There is a rhythm to it. There is a slide, cover, shoot, slide, tackle, assassinate, slide, and you can fit, although there isn't a combo system per se, there are challenges that make you actually kill a certain number of people in a certain number of time or in a certain way. But it does feel sometimes like you are chaining together tricks, but instead of using a skateboard, you're using an Uzi.
We like to think there's the role-selling ethos that we apply to all our games. And I suppose the first one of those is a tight set of mechanics.
They are easy to pick up but hard to master, and we like to imbue them with sort of a kicking soundtrack.
We really like to think that fits with the style of games we create.
And that is like the 3 tenets of the role-selling game.
And much like my abortive skating career, this episode must come to an unspectacular end. Until next time, you can stay in touch with us on the official Video Game Nation Facebook page or on Twitter using the hashtag VGN, which isn't a certain word with the vowels removed, thanks for asking. Until next time, check out this fresh madness. You think they bought that? Yep. Awesome, roll credits.
Thank you.